Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to see you all here. I'm going to kick us off and say a little bit about what today's event is going to look like. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to our global community, and then I'm going to introduce you all to our panelists. I'll pitch a couple of questions to our panelists as well, and then open it up to you all. We really want to make sure that you get all of your questions answered today. And then overall, we're going to be spending about 55 minutes together. So we're really looking forward to this time and getting your questions answered. So a little bit about what our global community at Stanford looks like. We have a truly global community. As I mentioned, we have over 60 regional alumni clubs around the world, 30,000 GSB alumni globally. And as part of the GSB experience, part of this experience is expanding your community and embracing perspectives and experiences different from your own. I think one of our greatest assets is the diversity of our community and that opportunity to learn from your peers. And that's something that we really, really value. We also have a global education requirement. It is our expectation that you will learn from your peers and learn from other leaders from around the world. We have over 50 clubs and organizations, including regional interest groups such as the Africa Business Club, the Business in India Club, the Europe Club, the Greater China Business Club, the Latin American Student Association, and the Middle East and North Africa Club. I would love for you all to meet our panelists as well. Let me see. Kenji, why don't you get us started? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. This is Kenji Tateiwa, Stanford MBA class of 2004. So I currently work for a Japanese utility, Tokyo Electric Power Company, and I've always worked for this company before the GSB and after GSB, which is quite unusual as a GSBer. But I've been working for the same company for a reason, and that is because I want to create a perfect energy world, providing clean, safe, affordable energy in a reliable way. And I firmly believe that I have the best chance of making a positive impact to the world by transforming TEPCO, a big incumbent, slow-moving dinosaur, utilizing my GSB skill set. So that's what I've been doing. Looking forward to talking with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Kenji. And I should note, Kenji is also one of our MVPs in our Meet an Alum program. I know so often prospective students want to talk to our students and our alumni. Kenji has been hosting events every Saturday for the past year. So if you can't get enough of Kenji today, take a look at our events calendar, and you could have the opportunity to talk to Kenji more directly in a more intimate setting. So thank you for that, Kenji.
Yeah, thanks.
Nishant, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. And hello also to Jessica, Will, and Kenji. Kenji, we last caught up at the GSB Singapore APAC conference, I think about a year and a half ago.
That's right. Yeah, good to see you, Nishant.
Before the world fell apart. But as a quick introduction, I'm originally from India. I grew up in Perth in Western Australia. Started my career as an engineer in the oil and gas industry here. So for those of you familiar with Perth, it's one of the energy hubs of the world. I think quite fast after starting to work, I realized that there were folks who could probably do engineering a lot better than me, and applied to the business school at Stanford, and was fortunate enough to get in. I've since spent over a decade working across Southeast Asia, originally in Singapore, but soon after that was moved to Vietnam, was in Hanoi for a year and a half. From Hanoi to Manila, in between spent some time in KL, and been working across a range of industries. So unlike Kenji, who's had the fortitude to excel with one company, I've been involved with a few different ventures, and happy to talk about them in more detail. So I currently run my own startup in partnership with my wife, who's a GSB class of 2011 grad, focused on the mother and child e-commerce space here in the Philippines. and also advising a regional private equity group called Creador on their Philippine investments and operations.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. And Tanvi, thank you for being here. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Jessica, and apologies to everyone for not being on screen earlier. I didn't realize I was named something else on Zoom because you can't change your name in a webinar. So I was just struggling. With that. Definitely not appropriate to be the youngest member in the panel who is not operating Zoom properly, but we'll move past that. So I graduated from Stanford last year. June 2020, straight into the pandemic. I am based in Delhi right now, and I also grew up in Delhi. My background prior to the business school was in philanthropy, and I was interested in social entrepreneurship. During the business school, I started a social venture called Tamarind Chutney, which is a sustainable and ethical apparel brand, and I fully credit Stanford's various resources in sort of giving me that push. And I've been doing that since, so I'm very excited to answer any questions today.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for those introductions. So before we get into Q&A, I do want to let our attendees know that this is just one stop along your journey. If you haven't already created a mystanford.mba dashboard, I strongly encourage you to do that so you can keep in touch with us. You can browse our events, get personalized information tailored to your interests. So strongly encourage you all to do that. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen so you can see us all a little bit better and get us started with a couple of questions. So for our attendees, please feel free to submit your questions in our Q&A box for our panel. You can also upvote other attendees' questions if you see something that addresses any of your interests. So I'll get us started. For our panelists, I'm curious, what made you decide to pursue an MBA, and why specifically a Stanford MBA?
So shall I go first?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. So everyone. So again, Kenji Tatia, class of 2004. So I joined Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, in 1996 after getting my bachelor's and master's in nuclear engineering. So I was working for TEPCO as a nuclear engineer, initially at the Fukushima Dai-2 nuclear power station, and then at the headquarters in the nuclear engineering department. And I was specializing in nuclear safety design for the next generation nuclear reactors, collaborating with companies such as General Electric, Toshiba, and Hitachi. And I was proud of what I was doing and was determined to continue my career as a nuclear engineer. But then in early 2000, there was this US energy company called Enron. Some of you may remember Enron. Enron was in its pinnacle in the early 2000s, came into the Japanese market, and there was rumors that Enron may try to take over Japanese utilities. And I thought that the TEPCO management was not up to the task in fending off Enron. And I learned that the Enron executives had this thing called an MBA, which I did not know at the time. So I looked up what it was and then decided I should get one myself, and then started my application process. And why Stanford? There are myriads of reasons, but one of the more important reasons was that Stanford GSB has this culture which was at the opposite end of the spectrum compared to TEPCO, the old, slow-moving bureaucratic company, whereas at the Stanford GSB, it's the cutting-edge, entrepreneurial, agile environment where I can learn more of that spirit and bring it back to TEPCO and transform that company. So that was one of the reasons I chose, or Stanford was my dream school.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Cool. I'm happy to go next if we're going by graduating year. Yeah, Nish again from Manila, Philippines. And I guess the MBA decision was fairly straightforward for me as an engineer with a core engineering background. I'd say the engineering degrees in the likes of Australia, similar to most of the Commonwealth, tend to be very technical. very focused in terms of engineering itself. So, you know, if you do an undergrad degree in the US, if you major in engineering, you could still take a bunch of classes in business, to, you know, religious education, to ice skating and everything in between. And I think, you know, come out with a very well-rounded education, even if your degree says engineering, right? In my case, you know, I think 95% of my classes were engineering focused. I started my career as an engineer, more as a project manager, and it was a dream engineering job. So for any engineers listening, you know, I think certainly the role I was in was not a motivating factor. It was more, I think, a desire to broaden organizational focus. So I loved what I was doing. I spent time on the back deck of ships in the middle of the ocean, supervising underwater operations with remote submarines, and, you know, tiger sharks circling the boat, and it was a lot of fun. But I think wanted a flavor of how companies ran outside of just the technical project management arena, right? And how did they work from the standpoint of strategy, marketing, finance, and MBA was a very good solution in terms of providing that I guess the rounding over there, right? Why Stanford? I had visited Stanford as an undergrad. I studied on exchange at the University of Illinois, and I had a distant uncle who I visited in Northern California, and he took me around, showed me the campus, and I think you know, if any of you guys have visited Stanford, you fall in love with it pretty fast, right? And so always wanted to go there. You know, a tremendous brand, a wonderful reputation of collaboration. At that point of time, you know, the energy space was very exciting. Lots of innovations happening in the valley with clean tech and other innovations. So it fit right into my background in energy. And then finally, the entrepreneurial spirit. You know, whether I wasn't sure whether I wanted to jump into being an entrepreneur right after the MBA or do it down the line. But I knew whatever I did, taking that eye for converting entrepreneurial opportunity into tangible results was something that Stanford could give me. And here I am, 10 years on.
Awesome. Thank you. Tanvi, you want to close us out?
Sure. So I actually applied to business school in my final year, in my senior year of college, as a deferred admit. So I was like 20, 21 years old. I mean, I think at that time, I'm not sure if there are too many people here looking for deferred admission, but I can go into it a little bit. I think at that time, I had just heard from an older colleague / mentor at one of my internships that this is a cool program to do, to sort of give you flexibility and freedom to, you know, like if you get into business school in college, then the next 3 to 4 years you can explore a little bit and experiment and you know, try a bunch of things. So that's why I applied. It was definitely a sort of nothing to lose situation because I still had to find a job. But once I got in, I felt like I could then, you know, take the plunge and do something a little more risky, in the sense I went for a slightly less known brand for my first job. So that was great. But I think, you know, to something that might help applicants that are applying in the regular cycle, I feel like I realize more retrospectively, for people maybe in the development sector, or for people that have slightly unconventional, not business background. I think Stanford is really the place to be, because of how diverse the class is, because of how entrepreneurial the class is. I mean, I have friends at other business schools where, you know, 60% of the class is going into consulting or finance. And then if you're not that person, you really feel the pressure that everybody has got a job by January and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think at Stanford, because there's so many people trying startups, looking at different firms in the Bay Area that have very different recruiting cycles, you're never alone at any point being like, okay, you know, everybody has a job and I don't. And it really helped me not get into peer pressure and explore things that I wanted to. So that was great. I think it's much more laid back in that way, in a good way. And I also felt like the class size, you know, being a little smaller was really good to have a more intimate experience. I definitely felt like I, if not knew every classmate of mine personally, but at least know them by face and by name. And I could definitely reach out to them and they wouldn't be like, wait, who are you? Are you sure we're in the same class? And I think that familiarity was also really great. And I probably didn't know that, or I didn't think about it at 20. But as I was going through Stanford, I felt like, I was very lucky that, I didn't know these things, but I still landed up at Stanford and found the right fit for me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So I'm going to turn to our attendee Q&A now. And Paul asked a great question that was actually on my list of questions as well. Paul wants to know, what are the Stanford resources, opportunities, or experiences that helped equip you for a career in Asia?
I can start. So I think, I grew up in India, and so coming back to India was always something that I was really interested in. But I think Stanford definitely helped me learn, like, keep my knowledge about India up, and also learn about other parts of Asia, more specifically China. So about India, I was part of the Business in India Club, and we organized a lot of talks, and sort of called speakers in, did events with companies in the Bay Area that maybe were focused on India or had India offices. And I think that was really great. I didn't feel like, okay, because I was away from India for 2 years, I had lost track. And then there were all kinds of events that were happening, various elections, this, that, and the other. And there was always conversation about it. So there's definitely that community. But the other thing that I feel like Stanford really helped me learn about was China. I probably didn't know anything about China, especially as an Indian. I had, I knew about China because Chinese goods are everywhere in India, but I didn't really have any sort of academic or business perspective. And I took, my global study trip was to China. So that was really, really great. That was in the spring of my first year. That got me very interested. I took 2 more courses on China through the business school, one on the political economy and one more on financial systems. And then I also led a global seminar to China. I'm not sure in this pandemic situation how many of these global experiences are relevant, but it was really, really great. I think I went from knowing nothing to be able to, like, I'm definitely not an expert, but I think I can now sustain my own knowledge in the sense that, I can read more, I can, like, pick up a book or something. I reached a stage where I'm like, okay, I can keep on learning by myself. And I think I focused on China just because I was interested in Asia and emerging economies. There's so many other people who focused on Southeast Asia, for instance, Japan. Like, there are study trips, there are classes, there are clubs. So I think if you go in within a specific interest, you can always find the resources that that will help you learn more. And also then there'll be other people who are interested as well.
Cool. Thanks, Tanvi. No, that was great. I think in my case, I'd focus on maybe 3 aspects, right? I think one is, your classmates, right? I think in my year, close to 40%, I think, of students were international, might be more now. A significant portion of them from Asia and Australasia. And so I think firstly, just meeting these incredibly accomplished classmates from China, from Thailand, from all across Southeast Asia and Asia. Of course, I'm also originally Indian, so very familiar with India's landscape. But like Tanvi, learned a lot about China, learned a lot about the other markets in Asia, Japan, right, Korea. So that was one element I think was hugely enlightening. And these all folks from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different personalities, and it was great fun getting to know them. The other aspect were classes and of course even lecturers. So I took classes such as global context of management that helped sort of crystallize some frameworks and so on when approaching international markets. What are the key challenges you'd face there? Things like facilitating payments and regulatory environments and things like that you might not be coming across quite as often in the likes of Australia, right, or the US or Canada. And lecturers as well. I mean, you had Hao Li, for example, who was one of the thought leaders when it comes to global operations, and learning firsthand from someone like him about supply chains in Hong Kong, for example, and China was amazing. And then finally was a global experiences. So I undertook the Stanford Tsinghua exchange program called STEP. Jessica can confirm whether that's something that's still being offered. But that was a fantastic learning opportunity because you got paired up with students from Tsinghua's international MBA program, and you got to work on actual projects together. So we and myself and another partner paired up with a couple of students in Tsinghua University to study the renewable energy landscape in China and learnings applicable to the US and other markets at the time. So those are few approaches. There's obviously many more. I'm sure Kenji can also share some of those.
Yeah, just a little bit about the GSB network in Japan. There are about 600 alumni, GSB alumni, including the second-year program, the 1-year MSX, and then the several weeks SCP executive program. And I've been on the leadership team of the GSB Japan chapter since I graduated in 2004. So I got to know many or most of the alumni here. So, and the network is very strong. And although in my case, I'm in this niche nuclear industry, so I have been directly utilizing much of the GSB network. However, the various events going on, it allows you to tap into different expertise and get to know a lot of people. So other alumni, they are utilizing that network for finding new opportunities and so forth.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We have a couple questions about entrepreneurship at the GSB. And I often find that this is a very common interest among our prospective students. So I see a couple questions directed towards Tanvi and Nish. I know you're also an entrepreneur. Can you comment on some of the entrepreneurial resources and opportunities at the GSB and how they supported your entrepreneurial ventures post GSB?
Sure, happy to go first. I mean, I think the GSB and entrepreneurship are almost, I mean, they're inextricably sort of connected, right? I mean, so many of the world's most amazing companies were formed as a result, directly or indirectly, because of Stanford University. That in turn was part of its location in the middle of Silicon Valley, and it's sort of a chicken and egg thing there, right? The valley also sprung up around Stanford. Stanford has benefited hugely from having the Silicon Valley ecosystem around it. And I think just being in that environment alone is something that you know, permeates everything at Stanford, right? It permeates a classroom, it permeates your interactions inside and outside of campus. So you're exposed to basically some of the hottest startups on the planet, just a stone's throw away from you in Palo Alto or elsewhere in the Bay Area. You're learning from lecturers who've not just you know, sort of lectured in the classroom, but many of whom have actually gone out and started extremely successful companies, then come back to sort of share their learnings. You have talks from business leaders, from Bill Gates through to you know, the top VC venture capitalists in the country at any given point of time, you know, every week. So I think it's something that you really can't escape for better for worse, right? But clearly for the better. And you know, it's a hugely inspiring environment to be in, because it helps you. If you came in, for example, saying, "Hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, and I want to start a company, and you know, it'd be fantastic if I could start a company of 100 people and you know, do $10 million of revenue or whatever it is, right? That would be a great lifestyle." You come out of the GSB and you're like, hey, you know, I want to start a company employing 10,000 people, and you know, that's a unicorn, right? And it's a $1 billion plus company, right? And it's really that kind of inspiration and I guess the tools that you get equipped through the classroom, through your classmates, through lecturers, through the ecosystem, the internships available to you, and so on, that really prepare you for a career in entrepreneurship post GSB.
Awesome, thank you. Tanvi, you want to chime in?
Sure. So, I mean, I think like I echo a lot of what Nishant said about, people like just Stanford being part of the ecosystem. I think in general, what business school also gives you is just space to experiment, right? Like, you can try something out, like in your summer break through classes, and if it works, you can run with it. If it doesn't, it's okay, you can do something else. And that sort of risk, like, it really lowers the risk. And Stanford is better than I think most schools than that, because of like its proximity to like the Bay Area, and also entrepreneurial culture. So there are classes that I took, for instance, Startup Garage is one of them, where you basically get advice from VCs and entrepreneurs that have started and funded successful Silicon Valley companies on your idea. And you also can get be like really like not funding, but you can get like $1,000 here and there to play with your idea, run some ads, make some light mock-up of a product. And like that stuff really goes a long way. I mean, I think in general it goes a long way. If you're building for Asia, it goes an even longer way. I think like with my stipend and coming back to India, I used it for months and months. So I think those sort of classes, the Center for CES, I think it's called, for the Entrepreneurial Study Center, CSI, the Center for Social Innovation. There's so many coaches and mentors there that sort of help you workshop your ideas, give you feedback, connect you to people. And then I think if you have an idea, any other class can sort of become something that you apply to your idea. So for instance, when I took my communications classes in my second year, I got better at pitching for my idea. When I took my writing class, I wrote an op-ed. Like, you could like totally, I mean, you don't have to do this, but you could literally fit your idea in whatever practical classes that you want, and you can make progress on various aspects of your own development or your idea. So I think there's, while obviously like I went personally, I think I went a little bit extra in the sense that I did like start working on my business through business school, and that has negatives, like it gets very stressful. But I think the advantage is that you can really use all these resources to your benefit, and I think that was great.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Next, there's a really lovely question from Tian Yin, who asks, what is the biggest impact your GSB experience has created on your career and your life? And I'm going to start with Kenji, who, as you all might see in the chat, has dropped some of his information and has clearly had a very illustrious career and life post GSB. So Kenji, what is the biggest impact GSB has had on your career and life so far?
Yeah, thanks. So let me talk about two anecdotes. One is the pre March 11th, 2011 Fukushima accident. So before that, after getting my MBA in 2004, I spearheaded TEPCO's overseas nuclear business, and I got to use many of the GSB skill sets in negotiating a deal for TEPCO to become the first Japanese utility to invest in an overseas nuclear project in Texas, US. And then the biggest impact was during the Fukushima nuclear crisis after March 11, 2011. And the touchy-feely course that many of you probably have heard came in handy in an unexpected manner when I was asked by the TEPCO management to serve as a facilitator and coordinator between the United States nuclear industry team who came to the TEPCO headquarters in late March 2011 to provide technical support to TEPCO to combat the Fukushima crisis. But because it was like chaotic, the TEPCO management was not ready to make the most out of the very generous offer from the US team. And so I was asked to talk with the leader of the US team, where I got to use the touchy-feely technique in having communication in an American way, where I asked the leader of the US team, may I ask you why your team came to Japan on an empty airplane when people were fleeing Japan out of fear of radiation, whereas your team came to Japan and you're offering TEPCO free technical advice. That sounds too good to be true. And the leader of the US team actually appreciated my candor in an American way. And he gave me two reasons why the US team came to Japan to support TEPCO. Number one was because the global nuclear community, we're on the same boat. If someone's having an issue, it's everyone else's shared issue. And because the US nuclear industry had the most expertise, they felt that it was their responsibility in supporting TEPCO. Reason number two was because the Fukushima nuclear reactors were originally designed by General Electric, the US team had to understand what caused the accident, what are the lessons learned, to bring back those lessons to the US to ensure safety of their nuclear fleet. And that kind of communication allowed me to understand that the interests between TEPCO and the US nuclear industry were completely aligned in tackling the crisis together. And we were able to form a very strong team in solving many of the very complex issues on a daily basis. And that was thanks to the touchy-feely course I took a long time ago, back in 2003, 2004 timeframe.
Thank you for sharing that. Nish, Tanvi, any reflections on the impact GSB has had on your life and career?
Yeah, I think the one word that would sum it up would be people, and you know, the lifelong relationships you end up making at the GSB, right? And I think Tanvi had touched upon it earlier, but you know, the GSB is a relatively small class size, and I think that really translates into really deep bonds. You're almost in an environment where everyone's like family. You know, it's a real community. And the thing that I guess I didn't appreciate, and I can appreciate now with sort of 10 years of plus of hindsight, is that it's a lifelong journey. So, you know, you make some great friends over there. I think first and foremost, you know, which in my case was meeting my wife there, right? And I was assigned to be her buddy. The Stanford has this buddy program where, you know, you're kind of like an informal mentor to an incoming second year student. And so she says I took advantage of my position. I say I took my responsibilities very seriously. But you know, in addition to that as well, you know, made some fantastic friends. And you know, 10 plus years down the line, our paths cross. You know, you go to Paris on business. You know, somebody passes through Manila for a holiday, and you know, you didn't really know them that well in school, but thanks to Facebook and stuff, you drop them a line. You say, hey, I'm passing through town, let's catch up. And you really hit it up, and you have these deep sort of conversations. And you said, hey, you know, where were you for 2 years when I was at business school, right? And so I think the people you meet, and it's not just purely from a friendship standpoint, right? I think it just completely opens your mind in ways that you never thought possible. You know, it sort of expands your thinking, right? And then I'd say from the standpoint of even career, like I've been involved with a few different ventures post business school. So I started my career outside of or following Stanford with a US power company developing and investing in power plants across Southeast Asia. Initially got in touch with the president of Asia in that company through a Stanford introduction. Right. I moved on, you know, started in the Philippines, a coconut farming and processing company, an agri-tech venture. Got in touch with this person through who is also a GSBer who graduated about 10 years before me, again, through the local Alumni Association. Right. When I wanted to move on to an investment career, an introduction was made to a founder of this private equity firm, again, through one of my GSB classmates. And right now I'm running an e-commerce venture in partnership with my wife, who's also GSB, right? So it's been impactful in sort of myriad ways, but people is first and foremost.
I think I'm too early in my career to have definitive answers, but both I think Kenji and Nishant's answers are very exciting for me, and I'm looking forward to see how it plays out. Yeah.
Thank you all. There are a few questions that I'm going to try to bring together. And you all have provided so many rich examples of the ways that you've used the skills and resources and opportunities at the GSB to how you've used them in your career. There are several more questions about sort of the specific skills or networks, programs, alumni base, and how you've used them to support your current work. So any further reflections there? I feel like we've heard several great examples, but would love to hear more.
Yeah, one other example related to the Fukushima nuclear crisis was about the Greater Stanford University Network in Japan. When in 2011, the earthquake and tsunami and the nuclear accident happened, the US ambassador to Japan was Ambassador John Roos, who is a Stanford Law School alumnus. And I had known the ambassador prior to the earthquake, tsunami, and accident through the Japan-Stanford Association network, as I was board member for the Japan-Stanford Association. And so the JSA members were invited to the ambassador's official residence in Tokyo to watch the football game between Stanford and UC Berkeley, the big game. Stanford won, by the way. But so I had known the ambassador, and when the accident happened and the United States provided humanitarian support to Japan with regard to the tsunami victims, and also supported the nuclear crisis, there was a get-together in June 2011 at the ambassador's residence with hundreds of Americans and Japanese who responded together as a team. And although there were hundreds of people and many senior people, I found I saw the ambassador and walked up to him and told him I'm Kenji from the Stanford event, and he happened to remember me. And I told him I happen to be a TEPCO nuclear engineer, and I wanted to thank the ambassador for the United States support to Japan and TEPCO. And that would not have been possible without the Stanford network, because the ambassador is a very senior person, and I was a nobody of TEPCO. But anyway, so that shows the strong bond, not just within the GSB circle, but also the greater Stanford University network.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure you were not a nobody at TEPCO. But yeah, I hear from our students all the time that part of the benefit of going to the GSB is that access to the rest of campus, the rest of community, being able to take classes, as we say, across the street in a variety of different disciplines and departments. So I'm glad to hear that extends beyond just classes to the greater community.
Yeah.
Shant, Tanvi, any additional reflections on some of the experiences, opportunities, courses that have had a big impact or have supported your careers in Asia?
Sure. So I think Kenji already talked a lot about touchy-feely. I second all of that. It was a really, good course that sort of helped me become more effective as a leader, a communicator. And I think a lot of like Stanford's courses around soft skills, managing people, coaching people are really, really helpful in sort of my day-to-day work in ways that I didn't realize. I think when I was there, I was like, oh, this is great, but like, how will I use it in the real world? And then, you step into the real world and you're like, oh, it does, matter how exactly you give feedback. It does matter to sort of, chart out, like for instance, with me and my co-founder, we have daily check-ins all the time about work, but we also have check-ins that are more about like, okay, how are you feeling about the business, about growth, about the fact that whatever, like, running an e-commerce fashion business in the pandemic just has its own challenges. So it's been a tough year, and sort of carving out that time to talk about not business and tasks, but to really talk about where we're at is definitely something that I learned and internalized very much at Stanford, at GSB, through these classes, through touchy-feely, through the Arbuckle Leaders Fellowship, which was also a really, really good opportunity to work on these things. And I think in general, I used all these classes as ways to work on challenges that I had professionally earlier, whether it was conflict management or being more assertive or just aspects that I had gotten feedback on in my previous jobs. These classes were really great places to try out new behaviors and then to sort of go out into the real world and say, okay, now I can do this. Now, I'm not, like, I'm okay to say no in a meeting without it turning into a crazy conflict or whatever. So I think these small things that I learned at the GSB actually have a really big impact on how I can handle meetings and interactions with different stakeholders. And I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't even have any of these skills to use before the GSB.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think great examples by Kenji and Tanvi. A couple of classes that stood out for me. I mean, well, firstly, the sort of entrepreneurial classes, right, that really play very tangibly into the career I have right now. The likes of formation of new ventures and so on, being taught by again seasoned entrepreneurs and business leaders in the Valley. One softer skill class that was fantastic and legendary was managing growing enterprises, which was taught by Irv Grossbeck, who is one of the owners or was one of the owners of the Boston Celtics, and created the concept of a search fund back in the 80s, right, where you set up a fund to go and acquire a company and then grow that and generate returns for the investors. And that class was all about basically situations in these high growth companies where difficult situations, difficult conversations that you had to have, and frameworks in order to approach such situations, right? And then we would actually have very real life cases about these situations. We were cold called and had to kind of play out how we think we should handle this, right? And plan out conversations and things like that. And at the end of the class, we would often have the actual protagonists in the case present to tell us what actually happened. And sometimes it might be in line with how students had played it out, and sometimes it was complete curveballs, right? Like that you never expect how that situation really ended, right? And they talk about their regrets or talk about, very candidly about, you even once had, the founders of Bonobos who came in, right? And at that point of time, they had already split up, right? And so they talk very candidly about what worked, what didn't work. And, I thought that was quite remarkable.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. There's a great question from Sarab. And Tanvi, I think you touched on this a little bit, describing sort of the culture of vulnerability at Stanford, but Sarab is wondering if you had to describe the on-campus culture at Stanford in one word, what would it be? I love that question.
I think maybe I would go with authenticity. I think there's I felt like I was allowed to just be who I was without thinking so much about, okay, what are these, what am I supposed to do? And I think given all these classes about, vulnerability and giving feedback, like people say, feedback is a gift. That's what we keep like saying at the GSB. So I think there's even like a very intentional focus on being authentic through like the classes, the curriculum, and the overall culture.
I would say in addition to Tanvi's comment, maybe perhaps collaborative. So yeah, all classmates are super smart people, but there's a culture of teaching each other. So in my case, as a nuclear engineer, I could ask stupid financial questions to my former investment banker classmates, and then vice versa, I could teach some engineering classes to non-engineering background classmates. So that was okay. And for me, having educated in Japan, the American way of proactive participating classroom style was foreign to me. So I struggled initially to raise my hand and speak up. But when I gradually tried to do so, one day my classmate slipped me a note saying that was a great comment, Kenji, which encouraged me to speak up more and and provide value to the class discussion. So that's the kind of collaborative atmosphere at the GSB.
Yeah, I totally echo Tanvi and Kenji, and instead of adding on to those words, right, I'll sort of embellish it with another example. In my very first quarter, I had a classmate from Nigeria whose father passed away, very tragically, and he had to fly back all the way to Nigeria. He came back a week or two later, obviously very distraught and so on, having to sort of get back into class. And this was just before our exams, right? And this guy came from a marketing background. And we had a tough finance class coming up in a week, right? And I had another classmate who did finance as an undergrad degree, right? And despite all that you have going on, and Tanvi and Kenji will attest to the fact that the GSB can be quite overwhelming just with the sheer volume of things going on at any given point of time, right? Talks on campus, off campus, academics, job sort of hunting and networking and things like that. This guy took about, I'd say, 10 hours out over 3 days, so about 2 to 3 hours every evening after classes ended, to coach our classmate in finance before the exam, just to get him up to speed on like the last 2 weeks or whatever he missed, right, because of his this family tragedy, right? And that's the extent when we talk about collaboration and empathy and vulnerability, right? That's the extent of support, and that's what the Stanford bonds translate to, right? And I think in part it's also shaped by the West Coast business culture, right, which is very much entrepreneurial, very much about value creation. It's like, hey, I'd say the East Coast business culture tends to be sort of shaped maybe a little bit more by Wall Street, right? Like if I grow my slice of the pie, that's a little bit less pie that you're getting, right? Whereas I think in the West, it's hey, if you have a pie, I'll just create another pie, and then we can both sort of share pies, right? And so it's a culture, I think, that tends to permeate Stanford as well, and yeah, a very transformational place to be.
Thank you for sharing those stories. I think those were all such beautiful illustrations of what our community and our culture are like. So thank you for that. Yukio asked an interesting question, and I'll read their question and then maybe reframe it a little bit. So Yukio asks, I suppose the world and Asia have been changing a lot after you graduated from GSB. If you were to go to GSB again now, what would you like to do? And perhaps another way of thinking of that question might be, if you could do it all again, what would you do differently? Were there any surprises? Were there any opportunities that you wish you had taken advantage of? What would you do differently if you were to do the experience over, if anything?
So
I'll jump in.
Oh yeah,
no,
go ahead, Nisha.
Oh,
okay. So yeah, short anecdote. So not specifically related to Asia, but what I regret, one of the biggest regrets that I have during my GSB years was that I took this course called Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders Seminar, where prominent entrepreneurs came to the GSB and gave inspirational talks. There was an option to go see the speaker in person, or you could watch it online. And I was very busy on a certain day, and so I chose the online version. And the speaker of the day was a guy called Elon Musk with SpaceX. And because I had met Jeff Bezos in person, I've seen Steve Jobs in person at the GSB, I thought I could skip this guy, and I regret it to date. But that shows how much opportunity there are out there at the GSB, and you have to prioritize, and sometimes you do make mistakes. So if I could go to the GSB again, I'll go meet Elon Musk.
Wow, who knows? You could have been in space this week if
That's
you had gone to class.
Oh yeah.
On that note, one of my most memorable experiences is having a lunch with just half a dozen others with Carlos Ghosn, right, of Renault, Nissan fame or notoriety at the moment, right? But coming back to Jessica's question, I'd say the one regret I did have is maybe not taking one or two classes more across the street, as they say in Stanford, right? And I think when you're in the GSB, it's such an all-consuming bubble because there's so much going on, and you're just excited to get to know your classmates and network for that dream job and learn so much in terms of all the cool classes going on, that you tend to forget that Stanford as a whole is an incredible institution, right? I mean, you've got a university that's amongst the top in almost every discipline that is offered there, right? So besides business school, clearly engineering, law, earth sciences, education, and of course the design school, and I think that's probably my personal regret, taking a class at the design school or not taking a class at the design school and understanding things from a design standpoint, right? The product development, for example, from a design standpoint versus sort of the business approach, which is more, sort of, hey, where's the market need and coming at it from a completely different lens. So for those of you who are fortunate enough to get in to Stanford and get into the GSB, it's not just the GSB. Stanford is not just the GSB. It's a lot more than that. And so do research in advance, sort of plan out, a couple of the cool classes in other schools that you might want to take in advance. And then once you get there, figure out how to get in.
Yeah, I very similar. Even I was going to say that I think I thought I would take a lot of across the street classes, as many as I would be allowed, but I would get so excited about all the GSB classes that I didn't. And I think I wish I'd taken a computer science course. And on the other side of the spectrum, I wish I'd taken an English course, just because I think you can, of course, take like courses on Coursera, but to be in an environment like of this like super amazing large research university with all these resources in front of you, I mean, I think, yeah, I just wish I'd made more use of that, like in Stanford, outside, in the GSB, outside the GSB. And yeah, I mean, I think those would be two for me.
Awesome. Well, I know we are coming up on time, so I want to thank our panelists so much for spending a bit of your day with us. This has been really illuminating for me, and I'm sure it's been really illuminating for our attendees as well. And a big thank you to our attendees. We love that you've spent the past hour with us. Please let us know how we're doing. In the feedback poll, these events are for you, and we want to know how we are doing and how we're serving you. We have many, many more events coming up this summer, so please stop by our events page and see what else is going on. And we have a series of events in a couple weeks, the first week of August, called Application Week. We'll have workshops and panels all about getting through that application process, because we want to make sure that you get across the finish line and have all of your questions answered. So thank you again to our panelists, to our attendees. We're so glad that you spent a bit of your time with us today. Our panelists, any last quick parting words of advice you'd like to give our attendees before we close out?
I would just like to say that the 2 years at the GSB was a paradise, but a very extremely challenging paradise.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you all. Nishant, you had something to say?
No, I was going to just say thanks everyone for your time. I know it's very early in the morning for some people, and probably more odd hours for others. So appreciate everyone taking the time to listen in, and feel free to connect on LinkedIn or wherever if there's any more questions you have or you'd like to stay in touch. Happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day. Please feel free to reach out to our office if you have any remaining questions, and we hope to see you again at some of our other events.